Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our special virtual Enlightenment Salon of January 22nd, 2023. Today is the occasion of our 12th annual International Day of Protest Against Hereditary Religion. This is an event that was originally founded by Richard Collins, who unfortunately died several years after its founding, but it was carried on by our friend Eric Schulke of the Movement for Indefinite Life Extension. And Eric was kind enough to connect me with our esteemed panelists today. Our panelists are Dr. Lawrence Krauss, who is a particle physicist, cosmologist, best-selling author, lecturer, and president of the Origins Project Foundation, as well as host of the Origins podcast. We also have Armin Navabi, who is an author and podcaster, an ex-Muslim atheist, founder of the online Freethought community Atheist Republic, author of Why There Is No God, Simple Responses to 20 Common Arguments for the Existence of God. And we also have Dr. Valerie Tarico, a psychologist, writer, social commentator on religious fundamentalism, and author of Trusting Doubt, a former evangelical looks at old beliefs in a new light. We have Dr. David Orenstein, professor and department chairperson at CUNY Medgar Evers College, a national and international speaker on issues related to the Freethought movement, and the American Humanist Association's representative to the United Nations. He is also the co-author of Godless Grace, How Nonbelievers Are Making the World Safer, Richer, and Kinder. And also joining us, we have several of our U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, including our Director of Visual Art, Ramon Garcia, our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, and our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg. And I would like to start this conversation by mentioning why the U.S. Transhumanist Party cares about the subject of hereditary religion and free thought, including for children. So in our platform, we have two sections that speak to this in particular. You can find the U.S. Transhumanist Party's platform on our website. And section 23 of our platform reads, "The United States Transhumanist Party supports the rights of children to exercise liberty in proportion to their rational faculties and capacity for autonomous judgment. In particular, the United States Transhumanist Party strongly opposes all forms of bullying, child abuse, and censorship of intellectual self-development by children and teenagers." In section 25, our platform states, "The United States Transhumanist Party welcomes both religious and non-religious individuals who support life extension and emerging technologies. The United States Transhumanist Party recognizes that some religious individuals and interpretations may be receptive to technological progress, and if so, are valuable allies to the transhumanist movement. On the other hand, the United States Transhumanist Party is also opposed to any interpretation of a religious doctrine that results in the rejection of reason, censorship, violation of individual rights, suppression of technological advancement, and attempts to impose religious belief by force and/or by legal compulsion." So with that introduction, I would like to give Dr. Lawrence Krauss the opportunity to make some opening remarks, and then we're going to have a question and answer session with him. So if you would like to think of some questions to ask Dr. Lawrence Krauss, please post them in the YouTube chat. Dr. Krauss, you have the floor.
Well, thanks. It's nice to be with you virtually. When I remember one of the first times I met my friend Richard Dawkins, with whom I've done many different events, he was giving a lecture and he said something that really kind of amazed me because I hadn't because like most people, I'd fallen for the ploy. He showed a picture from the front page of a newspaper in the U.S. It was on Christmas Day, I think, and it was supposed to be a heartwarming picture, and it had 4 little kids together, and it said, here's one Christian kid, here's one Muslim kid, here's a Hindu kid, here's a Buddhist kid, and they were 3 or 4 year old kids, and they were playing together, and you were supposed to feel good about the fact that here were all these different kids of different religions being able to play together. But of course, the point was, how can you call a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old a Christian or Buddhist or Muslim? There's no way. It's like calling them a neoliberal or a conservative 3-year-old, because they're just barely children. And that notion that we label children at that age by the religion generally of their parents is absurd. It's patently absurd. And I think it's amazing that we do that with impunity in our society. It reflects this notion that somehow it's okay to do that to children, and it's not okay. I think that's the key point. In fact, both Richard and I have argued at different times that imposing religion on young children at that age is a form of child abuse. It's not child abuse like other kinds of child abuse, perhaps, but in the sense that you're restricting their ability to think freely and to be exposed to many philosophies. You are, in fact, committing child abuse. But you're the other aspect of this kind of hereditary aspect of religion that is so insidious, and so it's in some sense it exposes the falsity of religions, and somehow it's never emphasized enough that if religions are true, it is amazing that the children of Christian people are generally Christian, the children of Muslim people are generally Muslim, and somehow if there are these universal truths, it's kind of amazing that these universal truths are exposed in vastly different ways to people based on the religion of their parents. And so the hereditary aspect of religion, in my mind, is one of its weakest links, if you want to expose the fact that religions reflect that humans created God rather than the other way around. The other aspect that I think is particularly insidious about the hereditary aspect of religion is that children are exposed to it at the same time as they're exposed to ideas of right and wrong. And of course, each religion's notion of morality tends to be different. And this close-knit aspect of morality and religion, the fact that religion has a monopoly on morality is really one of the major problems. The fact that somehow in many parts of the world, you cannot be viewed as a moral person or a good person unless you have religion. And I guess I'll just close by saying, I used to debate, have discussions about fundamentalism a lot when I first started talking about the attacks on science that fundamentalists made. And that's how I got involved in talking about this publicly. But what I realized is that fundamentalism, of course, is a severe problem around the world. But after, I guess, Richard and I made this movie called The Unbelievers about Richard and me, I started getting letters from a lot of people saying, I was just so happy to see this because there were large crowds, in this case of atheists. And I live in a small town in some place in the U.S., and I can't talk to anyone. I feel like a bad person because I'm questioning things. When, of course, everyone's questioning things, but I can't tell people I'm questioning things. I feel like a bad person. That's the monopoly on morality that religion has. And the fact that you can't openly question things is, of course, the other really disastrous part of religion. And it's important for people to realize that other people share those views, that it's generally universal. And the fact that people are afraid to say these things, often I've been told by people, they're afraid to say these things for fear of being ostracized, of having their children ostracized by other families who don't want their children associating with the children in question because somehow their parents have come out. So all of those aspects of the hereditary aspect of religion are part of the reason that on the whole, religion causes more pain than good in the world.
Yes. Thank you very much, Lawrence, for those remarks. And a lot of what you said resonates with me. In particular, the question that I have for you pertains to the common assertion that morality requires religion in some manner. And I encountered this because I was one of the few atheist students at Hillsdale College back in the late 2000s. And actually, my main disagreement with the many religious members, predominantly Christian members of the student body, was not over whether or not God exists. I tried not to really deconvert them, but I tried to persuade them that it is possible to be an atheist and to be a moral human being, that one does not have to believe in some sort of anthropomorphized supreme being in order to act morally. And I'm wondering, do you see opportunities to break through to religious people just in terms of that argument? Are there strategies that you have found to be effective, not in deconverting people per se, but just in convincing them that it is possible to be an atheist and to be a moral person?
Well, there are two things. There are certain organizations that already do this. There are a number of atheist organizations, some of which I've been associated with in the past, some of I haven't, but that do things like have drives for charity and helping out, doing the standard thing that religious organizations do. And so I think actions speak louder than words. So that demonstrating that kind of morality or ethical principles is an important one. The other, but I think the best argument I can give actually comes from a friend of mine, Steven Pinker, who well, it's where I first heard it anyway, and he basically said, if you didn't, let's say God wanted to, do you think that God would want to support, say, rape and murder of children? Okay, and the answer is absolutely not. Okay, for most people, and then you'd say, well, if that's a kind of a universal moral decision that God really has no role in determining, then why have the middleman? Why do you need it? I mean, so basically address people, as I've often done on stage too, saying, would you, if you didn't believe in God, would you murder your neighbor? And I mean, and every now and then one person will say yes, but on the whole, most people won't. And so when you point out these moral decisions that clearly represent things that people intuitively recognize are wrong, and point out that they still wouldn't have that behavior even if they didn't believe in God, it demonstrates that God has nothing to do with it.
Yes, indeed. And we have some viewer feedback as well. Chris Fricks writes, I feel the same way, Lawrence. Religion has a way of segregation that is not easily discussed. He also writes, yes, we are all generally altruistic without religion. We have evolved to cooperate with each other. Mike Lazine writes, yes, dogma is a huge problem with a number of faiths. And he also agrees in regard to characterizing children as religious. He says, just like when adults want to say that a toddler is of a certain sexuality, it is ridiculous. Young children in particular, have not developed the cognitive capabilities, the emotional maturity to really make those kinds of decisions yet.
Well, that's the key point, and I guess I should have emphasized before. It's that labeling children this way, these notions of God are very, and all of the notions associated with religion require a lot of thought and deep experience, and children just don't have that. So to impose upon them the notion of the existence of a divine being or an intelligence in the universe, which is a very complex subject and very sophisticated to be able to address that in some detail, is just not something that children are capable or have the experience to deal with, and therefore it's a kind of brainwashing which is really inappropriate. That's the sense in which I really meant it was child abuse. And by the way, as far as the notion of morals, another atheist, late friend of mine, a physicist named Steve Weinberg, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics, used to say, there are good people and there are bad people. Good people do good things, bad people do bad things. When good people do bad things, it's religion.
Yes, interesting remarks there. And our friend Alan Crowley writes, yes, I rape and pillage as much as I want, and that is exactly zero. The fact that someone needs a book to keep them from doing it, I find very disconcerting. And also our friend Dowd Sheikh writes, not only is it possible to be an atheist and a moral person, it is also possible to be religious and be an immoral person. And that is definitely something that needs to be kept in mind. That is, it seems that religion and morality are at best orthogonal to one another. And yes, there are definitely many religious people who are good human beings whom I respect, but it's not because of their religious framework. It is independent of their religious framework at the very least, and in some cases, despite their religious framework. So now I want to ask if anybody among the panelists has any questions for Lawrence Krauss. Armin, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to check if you think I'm giving good advice, because on our show on Atheist Republic, both on our English show and also on our Persian show, we often have in our audience parents who ask me if it's a good idea for them to tell their children that there is no God. And I usually tell them, maybe this is bad advice and you could tell me, I usually tell them no, because it's better not to give them the conclusion, but give them the tools to come to the right conclusion. I usually tell them to focus on teaching them critical thinking skills. And if they insist on, only tell them that you think there is no God, you don't believe in a God, if they insist on asking your opinion. But other than that, don't tell them that they have to arrive at this conclusion. But just give them the understanding, just give them the tools to be skeptical and understand what is a fallacy. And there are many tools right now for kids to practice these things. And I think that's what the parents should be focusing on. Do you think that's a good strategy?
Of course.
Because I'm not
to do otherwise is just like brainwashing them about the existence of God. It doesn't. The answer to that question is not as important as how you deal with children. And on the whole, I think there are three aspects. First of all, it's nice to ask them a question. Say, what do you think, and why do you think it, and work them through it. I think that kind of questioning and mutual discovery goes way beyond religion, but to all aspects of the world. I think more parents and more teachers should be prepared to say, I don't know. Let's think about it, and let's try and find out. Let's see what we can learn together as an act of discovery. So teaching them critical thinking skills is absolutely I think the correct thing to do, and to allow them to think it through themselves. It's very early, but you might ask why they think one way or another, or why they're asked the question, and use it as a chance to build some kind of discussion. And so there, I think there's little doubt that telling them one way or another, I think, is the wrong thing to do. No doubt about it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a question here from the Lone Wanderer's Bunker, who writes, whenever I succumb to the temptation of arguing with the religious, they always throw me the line, I don't have to prove a positive, you prove the negative. I just have to walk away. Any tips on that kind of interaction?
Well, I think you can. There are a lot of people. It's generally worth walking away from anyway, because you're not going to be able to convince them of anything. But I think you can use the line from Christopher Hitchens, who said, "That which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence," and so perhaps that's one of the best ways to respond. I think proving a negative is not something you can do. In fact, I think it's important for scientists to point out that science can't prove the non-existence of God. And in fact, I was going to say to Armin, in fact, just reminded me, I don't like to use the word belief with children or anyone else. As a scientist, I don't believe anything. Children, I don't like to use that word. Things are either likely or unlikely. And in science, scientists don't believe things, or at least, we say we do, because colloquially, but things are either likely or unlikely. They're very unlikely. If it's very, very likely, we tend to call it a fact. But I can't disprove that we weren't here, that the universe wasn't created 5 seconds ago. No way. And with all of us being here with the memories of having had this conversation or having been forced to listen to me. And so I think the point to point out is you can just say, what's likely and what's unlikely on the basis of evidence, and evidence is what matters. And I think, and if someone is willing to believe something without evidence, I don't think there's much you can do other than try and have a, as I said to Armin, even for kids, but try to have a Socratic conversation with other people, to ask questions about how they think, rather than asserting one thing or another, because asserting things based on authority really doesn't generally get you anywhere anyway.
Yes. And in those kinds of situations, to me, it seems the principle of Occam's razor is relevant. That is, the simplest explanation that is compatible with all of the available evidence is the one that we should adopt. So in this case, the simplest explanation is...
It is a good thing, but it's not a universal guideline, because what's simple sometimes isn't realized till after the fact, especially as a physicist. Many things are not very simple until after, even when you create them, until well after the fact. I think better to say that, it's not needed. We have no need of that hypothesis, or to respond like I think Bertrand Russell did. I can't prove there's no God, but I can't prove that there's also not a China teapot orbiting Jupiter. But it's just highly unlikely that there is.
Fair enough. Though perhaps somebody, as a prank in the age of space exploration, might launch a teapot in orbit just to make that particular point.
Then I'll have to change my argument at that point.
I'll have one more comment for you to respond to, Lawrence, and then we will ask Armin for his opening statement. 50 OAS writes, "It's a fairly depressing prospect for our sophisticated consciousness to just be sentient meat." Now, I don't share the view that it's depressing, but how would you respond to that?
No, I think it's the exact opposite. I think it's remarkable that we're sentient. We should celebrate it every day of our lives. It's just a remarkable cosmic accident. And in fact, the fact that we are just a cosmic accident makes our existence here, in my opinion, much more special rather than less special, because here we are, some random place in the middle of nowhere, 13.8 billion years after the Big Bang, able to ask these questions, have these questions, look up at the night sky and wonder if we're alone, and realize that, we're just here for a little speck, and yet we have this ability to question and understand. And what a shame not to use those abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, indeed. And to me, the fact of existence is indeed quite amazing, and the most important value that I seek to preserve, and that we in the Transhumanist Party seek to preserve. So just because there's no God doesn't make it less valuable at all. In fact, for me, this existence is the absolute greatest state of being, with all of its faults and all of its problems, because it's much better than the alternative.
Yeah.
So, Armin, please go ahead with your opening remarks.
All right, I'll try to be as quick as possible. So I have experienced, felt deep the cost of religious upbringing quite more than many people. As a child, I burned myself right here just to see, because how painful hell could be, because of the constant reminder that I'm going to be burned in hell. And I just tried to imagine that all over my body for eternity. And I could not imagine anybody being able to bear that for even 5 minutes, let alone an eternity. So before reaching the age of maturity where I would be responsible for my sins, I tried to commit suicide so that I do not commit any sins and make sure that I do not enter hell. I jumped out of the window from my school. I was unsuccessful. So when I reached the age of reason, I tried to become very religious. And by doing that, I realized, by studying religion and history and biology, I realized that none of this makes any sense. But when I became an atheist activist, religion, I left the country of my birth, especially because it was very religious. And I became a citizen in Canada. I started my atheist activism because I saw all the costs of religions, and because of my activism, I was targeted by governments of 3 countries. There was a call out for my beheading in Malaysia. A minister in Malaysia called out for a hunting down of our members of Atheist Republic. In India, there is 5 police cases against me and my co-worker, Susanna, for the CEO of Atheist Republic. The case against us, the blasphemy case against us, was brought up in the Supreme Court in India and also in the High Court of Delhi. And in Iran, they reached out to my parents when I was in Canada, trying to harass them so that they could get to me to stop my activism. So those are my personal experiences. Globally, I think the cost of religion is more significant than even some atheists recognize. There's this liberal order that we have that has made the world a lot more peaceful and stable ever since World War II. And some of the greatest threats to it is coming from the religious right in the United States, in Israel, and in India. But I don't want to get into too much detail on that because I don't have much time. So that rather than just sharing some negatives about religion, I do also want to share some positive trends in the world, especially from the country that I was born in, Iran. So I wanted to show you that not everything is bad. Things are going in the right direction in many places. This is the latest stats coming from Iran. You can see that most people, when you talk to them about Iran, they associate that with an Islamic country, a country with a Muslim majority population. However, if you look at the latest data coming from Gaman Institution, which is an academic institution, so if you add up all the Muslims on this graph, you have the Shia Muslims with 32%. But if you add all the Sunni Muslims and all the other Muslims, what do we have? I think we have Sufis as well, somewhere around here, but they don't add up to anything above 35%. So we are officially at a point where Iran is now a Muslim minority country, which is unbelievable. I never imagined being ever even getting close to something like this in my lifetime. If you see that the atheists and the nuns together and agnostics together, they add up to like more than 35%, which is comparable to European countries and North American countries, and even better than those countries. So it's quite amazing for a Middle Eastern country to have this many nuns, atheists, and agnostics. I am so amazed. When these numbers came out, I could not believe it. It was amazing. But here you can see that these numbers have been due to a dramatic change in Iran. If you look at down here, you can see that the question was, how have your religious or non-religious beliefs changed during your lifetime? So this is changes within one lifetime. We have never seen a shift this major in religious views anywhere in history. Such a mass exodus. You can see the red represents I went from being religious to non-religious. We're not talking about leaving Islam for another religion. We're talking about leaving Islam to no religion at all. And we have 46% of Iranians within one lifetime. This is within the last 40 years. Within the last 40 years, close to half of the population of a country with 85 million people, half of the population have left religion altogether. This is unbelievable numbers, right? And also, I want to show, there's so many other interesting stats here that I don't want to share all of them with you, but maybe this one is more related to the conversation today. There are opinions about hijab, which also make a lot of people shocked, but because this is more related to today's discussion, this is the last stat I want to share with you. So if you see the question, I want my child to learn about diverse religious beliefs in school, the majority agree, 53%, just about religions. But here's the question that is actually more interesting. I want my child to be educated in religious teaching and duties in school. 56% of the population disagrees. So when it's about religion, the majority, just understanding about the different diverse religious groups, the majority agrees. but just learning the teachings of religion. Basically, this is the part that we are more concerned about. This is the religious indoctrination. Most Iranians disagree with that. I would like to spend more time sharing more data from the study with you guys, but I know my time is limited. I don't know if I even have gone over time or not yet, but do I still have more time to share anything else?
Yes, actually, please feel free to scroll up to some of the charts. I'm going to share a few of our viewer comments on this. So Richard Russell writes, wow, I had no idea about what was going on out of public view in Iran. And John H. states that he read years ago that many young Iranians are even rejecting Islamic names and returning to using more traditional Persian personal names. And indeed, this is quite fascinating because in the minds of most Westerners, Iran is a theocracy, and it is, but that's pretty much what most Westerners know about Iran. They don't know about these underlying cultural and attitudinal shifts, which suggests to me that the theocracy's days may be numbered because no regime can last very long without at least a significant base of attitudinal support among the population.
True. And I also want to mention that the current revolution that is happening right now in Iran requires a lot more attention, especially from atheist content creators. I've seen very few Western atheist content creators YouTube channels to cover this, except Apostate Prophet and Atheist Republic. I've seen like so many of the greatest YouTube channels that we have that dedicate their content to atheism are ignoring the greatest a revolution against religion in history. The only one that even comes close to it maybe is the French Revolution, which is not necessarily anti-religion, but maybe it was a little bit against organized religion, if we could maybe form it like that. But this is a movement that has, not all of it, but within its identity, a major part of it, an attack on religion itself, not just organized religion, not just like a religion in power, but religious values as a whole. We have never had anything close to this in history, and it amazes me that so many Western atheists are ignoring this movement. We have atheists, like the atheist movement is a global movement, and atheists across from the Middle East are right now needing your attention more than ever. And I don't understand why Western atheists are completely ignoring their fellow atheists in the Middle East right now when they need them the most. So I beg of you, if you have any platform or if you have any form of audience, please, 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 right now they're struggling, they're dying, they're being executed in the streets, they're being shot at. And there are people on death row, and the fact that secular people or atheists or other activists and even feminists, because it's also a feminist movement that is happening right now in Iran, and I'm seeing very little attention to it. I'm even seeing mainstream media cover it, and even though mainstream media is covering it, I'd see atheists and secular activists are not covering it. Like, what else do you need for you to pay attention to this? So I beg of you to please cover this revolution and cover this movement.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you very much. And we will stay a little bit longer on this subject just to share some viewer comments. Dre Gibson writes, interesting information about Iran's attitude towards religion. I have two Iranian friends who are both secular. However, they grew up in Europe. Dowd Sheikh writes, exposure to science and technology has definitely accelerated that process of secularization of Iran's population. Dave Silverman wonders, do we know what the driving force is behind this movement and how can we assist it along? And you spoke a little bit about this, Armin. What would you say the main driving force or forces would be?
It's a government. It's living under a theocracy, has given people a taste of what religious values are, and they do not like it. So I would think I would say that the greatest force, it's amazing how, it's ironic how the greatest force for atheism has been an Islamic government.
Quite interesting, and yes, quite ironic indeed. So thank you, Armin, for sharing this, and we will have the opportunity to revisit the situation in Iran a bit later in our conversation. But now let us go to Dr. David Orenstein for his opening remarks. David, I think you need to unmute yourself.
I'm a bit of a Luddite, so I apologize for that. Thank you for the invitation to be here and to be with such fine colleagues. So, as an anthropologist, I come from a perspective of really an overview effect, which is, if you don't know what that is, most astronauts who, once they go up into space, they turn around and they look at the planet and they realize that we are more interconnected than we would assume just by being these little primate species running around on the planet, assuming that we're all different from each other. I was very fortunate as a child to, by about 8 years old, come to my non-belief. I don't put it in the words then as I do now, because I'm an adult. But I knew what I knew at 8, I still find today. And while Lawrence was using the terms likely or less likely to, I tend to use the word conclude, meaning that I draw my conclusions based on science and based on evidence to bring out my own personal truth. So with that, I'll read my personal statement and then talk about some of the research from one of my books, which you mentioned here. So my view is this: the only way for the universe to really know itself is for sentient beings to uncover, test, and explain how the universe naturally operates. We go back repeatedly to ensure what we know remains accurate, changing our assumptions as our knowledge and our techniques and our technologies and our ideas gain greater insight than generations before. In this way, we don't need to depend on magic or mythology or any central authority or philosophical dogma to show us a humanistic way forward. We can trust the machinery of nature by trusting the machinery of science and those who manage those controls. They have the means to intellectual production to, and I know this is a bit alliterative, to farm the fields of the cosmos to create abundance harvests of knowledge. When we do that, we see things as we've never seen them before. We learn things that we've not known before, and we become better humans because of it. In my view, as both an atheist, a non-believer, and as a secular author, and as an academic, I believe, or I'm sorry, I conclude that religion closes down that wonder and inhibits intellectual growth, both subtly and overtly through violence. It removes the mental tools to wonder and inquire. In a sense, it decapitates curiosity and skepticism. And those are just, and that's the nicest things you can say sometimes about religion. But essentially what a faith-based perspective will do is that it demands a fealty while it gives little in return except to reward ignorance and tribal identity. And so I've come to these conclusions after years of research, but I had the sense of this when I was 8 years old. And I have to say, I've been very fortunate to be able to come to these conclusions, not through necessarily self-fulfilling prophecy, but by actually doing research and speaking to people who were like me, who came to their non-belief at a very young age. But the other road that they came to it was through being believers at one time, and then because of some impact in their life, some life lesson they learned, giving up their belief because they saw, in The Wizard of Oz, when you pull away the curtain and you see the levers being moved, or as I like to say with the Matrix, when you put your hand up and you stop the bullets and you pluck them and you look at them, you realize really what's going on behind them. And it has very little to do with a spiritual life as it does with a life, with the lives of power from a sociological perspective, with the lives of authority, and with the value that we put in institutionalizing the need for the control of other people. And religion does that really, really well. And so I thank you for your time and attention. It's lovely to be here with everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, David, for those remarks. And really the fact that you were able to arrive at a skeptical, questioning disposition at the age of 8 is impressive, and it resonates with me as well. Now, I was raised in a non-religious household, so I had the wherewithal as a child to ask these kinds of challenging questions, and I would always ask, why is this the case, rather than something else, as a child. And fortunately, there wasn't a lot of strong pushback for me doing that. So that evolved into a lifelong habit of critical thinking and trying to seek out evidence for particular positions, rather than just accepting them based on authority or based on faith. For those who are interested, I prepared a video 10 years ago, actually, for the second annual International Day of Protest Against Hereditary Religion. And that video is entitled "The Benefits of a Non-Religious Upbringing, a Firsthand Account." So please check out that video if you're interested in my story. And now let us go to Dr. Valerie Tarico for some opening remarks. Valerie, you have the floor.
Thank you for including me in this conversation. Some of you know already, I was raised in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, so biblical literalism, and that is the primary lens through which I have both researched and critiqued religion. I want to say I was trying to kind of focus in on the childhood developmental and mental health aspects of hereditary religion in this conversation. And we just don't have a lot of academic research on the effects of religion on child development. And what we have was done here in the West. It's mixed. It doesn't kind of parcel out kind of the effects of kind of various forms of religiosity. But on average, what certain researchers have found in children who are being raised within hereditary religions is that they seem to be in grade school better socialized, but lower academically, and that their well-being, not surprisingly, was negatively correlated with parental conflict over religion. We know that child well-being and development is negatively correlated with parental conflict more broadly. So much of what we have to what we can say about what we can surmise about the child impacts of hereditary religion in childhood really comes from anecdotal information, so individual reports of their own lived experience. And if you go to a website like, for example, xchristian.net, you find literally thousands of those kinds of testimonials in which people talk very explicitly about what their own trajectory was through and then out of faith. What we know about those stories, if you kind of look at that anecdotal evidence, is that those individual stories correspond with a lot of things we know broadly about child development and thriving, or the lack of thriving, from research. For example, that corporal punishment is harmful to children and child development, whether it is religiously motivated or not. But I guess I would say that for people who are trying to parse this out, and I really hope that a new generation of researchers will come up and do more specific research on these questions about religion, now that we are able more societally, that there's more societal sanction for treating religion as a natural phenomenon and examining it using some of the same tools that we use to examine other natural phenomena. But in the meantime, I think that what I would suggest is that the effects of religion on child development and on mental health really depend on both the content of the religious beliefs and how they are practiced. So how coercive and authoritarian is it? Again, we have lots of evidence that raising children in authoritarian rather than authoritative homes, or kind of taking a democratic approach to parenting, is detrimental, although at the other end of the spectrum, permissive parenting can also be detrimental. How threat-based and fanatical and punitive is it? How much does it seek to generate fear of outsiders and outside ideas? How much does it either contradict or forbid evidence-based information from the outside world? And to what degree does it discourage or even forbid secular education? I have to say also that as someone who spent much of my adult life focused on family planning and the benefits of freely chosen and well-timed pregnancy, kind of tools that let parents optimize birth circumstances and family size, I can't help but wonder about the potential cascade of negative developmental impacts from this one single aspect of fundamentalist religion alone, that the idea is that women should let go and let God decide when and how their childbearing occurs. And I think that if you go way back through a long chain of causality, which I won't, that those ideas in fundamentalist religion are specifically still very derivative from the Iron Age or idea, the Axial Age idea that of women and children as economic chattel, which, as you all know, has the same root word as our word cattle. And the well-being of chattel really only has social and moral consequence as it affects the well-being of their owners. So I think that when we look at the kind of hereditary impacts of religion on children, we need to take into consideration that huge legacy in the way that it is, if not explicit, then even implicit in some of the more benign versions of the Abrahamic and other religions. I would say, kind of lastly, just to wrap it, that the most widespread coercive forms of religion in the world today are variants of Islam in places that are not accessible to research on child development or mental health. So, we've got some pretty dramatic and egregious examples of what's going on in Iran. We know that women and girls are being killed in Afghanistan to prevent female education. And it doesn't take a whole lot of thought to generate at least some hypotheses about how that might affect psychological well-being or development of children. So it's easy for folks in the West to be speculative or cautious about negative and positive consequences of children being immersed in religion. But we really need to remember that we're looking at a small part of the spectrum, that we are not actually asking the question about what happens when children experience that kind of coercion, not only within the family unit or within the church, but within society at large. And so I think that that is, I really grateful that Armin is on this call and that he's raising this question about how little attention is being given to the secularization within the Muslim world, and also the traumas and coercion within the Muslim world. Because I think that I live in Seattle, which I think of as the beating heart of the left coast of the United States. And I have spent a decade and a half immersed in progressive activism. And I have to say, living in that context, that there is a quasi-religious quality that has emerged on the left in the United States that deeply disturbs me in its parallels to evangelical Christianity. And I think that the ignoring and or denial of what's the kind of coerciveness of much of Islam comes from the fact that it is specifically anathema within the orthodoxies of the progressive left to talk about or acknowledge some of those dynamics. So I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you very much, Valerie. And I really appreciated the overview that you gave, such a nuanced exposition, drawing both on what the research does show, as well as emphasizing the importance of stories, narratives, what one might consider anecdotal evidence, but important data points nonetheless about the effect of religious upbringing on children, and the variety of such effects that are possible based on the kind of religious framework it is and how it is interpreted within a particular family or within a particular society. And most definitely the quasi-religious aspect of some contemporary left-wing social movements is an observation that I have had as well. Any time that a movement or a group of people will say you have to accept these ideas just on faith, or you're a terrible person, or you're evil otherwise, that is a major red flag to me. And interestingly enough, one of our longtime viewers, Super Fin Guy, was wondering, well, if religion fades away, hypothetically, I'm not saying that it is fading away, but what will replace religion with people? And the concern there is there may be certain underlying dispositions that are not caused by the religious framework per se, but were the cause of the religious framework or how it was interpreted. And if the religious framework disappears, something else that is just as bad or worse may fill the vacuum. So what are your thoughts on this and how it might be avoided? What skills, what faculties can we cultivate to help people essentially navigate that potential minefield? Armin, you wanted to say something on this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember whose quote this is, and I don't know, and I'm probably not saying it exactly. If somebody knows who knows what I'm referring to, please mention it. But there was a quote that went something like this, asking the question of, without religion, if religion goes away, what replaces it? Is kind of like a slave asking that if slavery goes away, then who would be my master? There's nothing that we need to replace religion. Religion is a source of evil, and without it, there's the time that we have free and the source of meaning and the sense of awe, we don't even need to figure out what to fill it with, because it's in the free market. Whenever we have a need, those things will just present themselves, because we are individuals and we are all very different from each other, right? The idea, religion has sold us this idea that we need this one thing, this one source of awe, this one source of community, this one source of meaning. But coming out of that religious mindset, I think we have to understand that we are very different from each other, and there's no one answer. And even without religion, if anybody wants to come out and sell you this one answer to serve this purpose for all individuals, it's kind of, they're replacing religion with something that is very similar to religion. We as individuals, we are so unique, and we all have different answers to these questions, and we just have to go on a journey and discover this for ourselves. And my answer is going to be different from your answer, and that's the whole point of individualism. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Armin. And I myself am a strong individualist as well. I think it is incumbent on each person to seek meaning and agency in their lives. David, it looks like you have something to say on this.
That's one of the root tenets of humanism, I might add. I don't want humanism to replace it either, but I just agree with you, is all I'm saying. Go ahead.
I would just mention that, if we want to look at religious-based thinking as a form of vestigial thinking, well, think about our own bodies. What's vestigial on our own body? We don't go around thinking, well, what's going to replace the gallbladder? But if we don't need this, then the body doesn't require it, and nor does human civilization going forward, and we've seen with the rise of the nuns, we've seen with the rise of non-belief. I mean, just recently there was an article about the number of churches that are closing in the United States, simply because, and some of it was caused by the pandemic, but it was a trend that was exacerbated by the pandemic, is that people are not going to houses of worship anymore. So if you look at in the quote unquote West, and you see the changes going on, you look at Iran and you see the changes going on. The reality is that we can get along very, very nicely without the need for a faith-based reality, a spiritual-based reality, very well as a human species. We're an adaptable species, both biologically and culturally, and so we don't need it.
Yes, thank you, David. And Valerie, what are your thoughts on this subject, particularly in regard to some people substituting this religious framework for another framework that is similarly authoritarian and intolerant, and how we can address that, how we can remedy that in our societies?
So my view on this is a little bit complicated in that there's a number of different ways that we can look at religions, right? We can look at religions as mind viruses, right, as a kind of complex family of mind viruses or meme complexes. And I've written extensively about that. We could also look at religion as a set of kind of aggregated cultural technologies, including the supernatural hypotheses that are there and that we have been able to very well substitute for with the scientific method. But I think that, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was some question about, I think, Alain Boutin, a philosopher, wrote a book called Religion 2.0 and kind of exploring what it might look like to replace some of those cultural technologies, if you will, what it might mean for us to find other ways to come together to talk about what we find meaningful in meaning and morality in life, how we kind of share our transitions, how we provide mutual support, how we how we express wonder and joy. And I do think those are very deeply part of what it means to be human. And then there were some experiments with that, with kind of secular Sunday kind of gatherings and things like that, that largely fizzled. So I think there's some unanswered aspects to that. What I didn't recognize during that time and during those conversations was how much religion may provide people with a sense of moral superiority, and that may be as strong a drive as all of those other things that I just mentioned. So when I look at some of the ways that what I might think of as secular religions have emerged during the 20th century and 21st century, kind of whether you're talking about communism as a secular kind of political religion, whether you're talking about some of the kind of things, the kind of cults that have emerged on the political left or the political right, I think that it's striking to me and a bit humbling how much people seem to have a need for bonding in communities that make them feel morally superior. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I would be interested if other people think that they've got some thoughts about where and how we might channel that in ways that feel constructive.
Yes, thank you very much for those comments. And indeed, I think the answer would be analogous to assembling pieces of a puzzle. So I can even bring up our virtual Enlightenment salons as an example of what could be done to cultivate a community in a positive and constructive way. And we do have a regular meeting schedule. It happens to be every Sunday. This is coincidental, but it's a gathering place for people to discuss ideas, discuss subjects of importance to people, including in terms of values, morality, ethics, philosophy. And I think people need that. People also need meaning in their lives. They cannot just have a vacuum of meaning. They will find something to fill that vacuum. So my thinking is that should be constructive and it should be inspiring to people. So the pursuit of science and technology and rationality, that would be inspiring for people. Now, our friend Alan Crowley writes, Eric Hoffer, in his book, The True Believer, which we discussed at a prior salon, shows how true believers, so-called true believers, most likely leave one religious worldview for another since they still want to believe in something. And he writes this in reference to the statistic from Iran, where 29% of the population identified as none, having no religious belief. And that is amazing to him because it shows that this true believer dynamic is not fundamentally what's playing itself out in Iran. There really is a rise in religious skepticism. So it is definitely a fascinating situation to follow. Now, also, Richard Russell writes in regard to Hoffer's book, Hoffer points out that Weimar Germany had street battles between Nazis and communists, but after the Nazis prevailed, many Reds just switched over. So if there is a kind of authoritarian mentality or a faith-based mentality where some people just want to follow some framework and that's it, and they don't want to think for themselves, then they'll follow the framework that is predominant in their milieu, so to speak. And if a previous framework is defeated and displaced by another, they will shift to the other framework. Alan Crowley also writes, the True Believer presents a very good case for this issue of belief being the problem, when a believer gives up one belief for another. And it's a very relevant book, even though it was published more than 70 years ago, 72 years ago now. So with that, I would like to pose a question to the panelists, which I think is quite an interesting premise. And this question, I think, was posed by our friend Richard Russell, and he wonders, if you were to inherit a former church, now closed or abandoned, what would you do with it, given your approach and your desire to cultivate rational thinking and individualism? How would you use such an asset? Who wants to go first? David, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, this almost became a reality for me about 4 years ago. I was in Lee, Massachusetts, and there was a church for sale. And I actually even put an offer in on it. The goal was to actually remake the church into a humanist center, to do all the things that a secular organization could do to enlighten the community within the confines of a building that was formerly used for worship of a deity. Now we're worshiping things like each other and science and art and literature. And so that was the ultimate goal. And I was inches away from the purchase when the people who were selling it actually changed their mind. So it's not even a theoretical question for me. It's one that's based in reality. But that's what I would do. Turn it into a place where people can come, regardless of whether they believe or not, and highlight the wonderful nature of our common humanity and the common dignity that we could all potentially all share, if we left those biases at the door and came in, and that door can be defined as anything, but certainly in that case. Thank you.
Interesting. Well, I really wish you had the opportunity to bring that vision of yours to fruition. I wonder, did the owners back out because they had some inkling of what you were planning to do with that building, or were the reasons unrelated?
No, I think the reasons, they just had a change of heart more than anything else. And it's funny because at the time, you may all remember Roy Speckhart being the head of the AHA. I was in communication with him very often. We're buddies, saying him, this is what I'm planning to do. And he was very excited. So, you know, we got close, but unfortunately it didn't really happen.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that,
Sure.
David. Not quite a hypothetical even, but almost a reality. So, Valerie, I'm curious what you would do if you were to come into the possession of such an old church building.
That's a great question. I mean, when I've talked about it in the past, you know, it's been in the service of having a local pub. But I think that my biggest thought, what I find intriguing about old church buildings is that they are situated, at least in the United States, in neighborhoods where otherwise kind of communal buildings are excluded, right? So within things that are zoned purely single family residential often. And so what I find most intriguing about the possibility of old church buildings is what it might mean to use them to generate a place-based sense of community where people come together, not around a set of orthodoxies, but around that aspect of religion that is about providing kind of mutual support, about the fact that within a lot of religious communities, people do take care of each other when they're sick, when they're widowed, when kids need kind of extra parenting, you know, when there's no grandparents and providing substitute grandparents. I would be curious about whether we might be able to dissipate some of the energy around orthodoxy and righteousness simply by elevating a sense of well-being and connection.
Yes, yes, indeed. I think that's a very valid point, that zoning in some regards has led to a kind of alienation in communities throughout the United States, because all of these different parts of people's lives are so separated from one another. And in residential areas, most often people don't know who their neighbors are, because they don't walk along the streets to go shopping. For instance, they go to a separate commercially zoned area to do that. They go to another area for their day jobs typically. And it would be nice to have a community center, whatever it is, if it's a humanist gathering hall, temple of reason, perhaps, to have people
Makerspace.
yes, or a maker space. It can be based on some sort of hands-on activity too. It can be based on any sort of shared activity that is constructive, that is fulfilling, that gives meaning and purpose to people. And that could create the kinds of social support networks that unfortunately have been greatly eroded in the United States over the past several decades. And one of our viewers, Christine Shelska, writes, if you want to see what has been done with closed and abandoned churches, visit Montreal. Interestingly enough, I was in Montreal about 21 years ago, in the summer of 2002. I walked around the central area, the old city of Montreal from the 17th century. I wonder if there are any historic buildings that have been refurbished from that portion of the city. But Christine, if you have any more information about that, please feel free to share. And Catherine Shurek writes, Meetup has helped atheists get together quite a bit. And Daniel Tweet writes, maker spaces as humanist churches, love it. Yes, this is definitely the kind of creative idea that can take hold. Now, Armin, if you were to come into possession of an old church or an old mosque, perhaps, what would you do with it?
Well, this would require quite funding in addition to the church. But if I had the church and some funding, I would fill it up with statues of Enlightenment thinkers and have interactive displays under it where you could learn about them, about what they contribute, what their ideas were, how they changed the world with their ideas. Have some physical books also of them, for both adults and kids, like to see the statue, look at their name, look at their biography, have some interaction, look at some videos of their life and some explanation, audio explanation, video explanation, but also explain their faults. So we celebrate these people that came with ideas that made the world a better place, either through science or a way of thinking that was not dogmatic and liberated people. Like one for Voltaire, for example, one for John Locke, one for like a couple of scientists, but also mention as a way for us not to be dogmatic, to show how we differ from churches and mosques or temples. We do not shy away from their faults. So we celebrate all the things that they did good, but there's also a section associated for the things that we do not like about them, the views that they had that were harmful. Just to show that we don't turn the other people who we celebrate into saints and prophets.
Yes, thank you very much, Armin. And I would be thrilled to attend such a display of the great Enlightenment thinkers. It reminds me actually of the library in Dublin at Trinity College that I visited in September of last year. I was in Dublin for the Longevity Summit hosted by Dr. Aubrey de Grey. And the day after the summit concluded, I, Liz Parrish, Dr. Michael West, and a friend of ours were visiting the Trinity College campus. And at the end of the exhibition we went to, we got access to this library, and there's a hall of busts, statuary of great philosophers from Socrates and Plato and Aristotle to John Locke, Isaac Newton. There were essentially all of the great 18th century authors and scientists there. And it was amazing because a lot of these busts were actually created in the 1740s, and then there was a second wave of them in the mid 19th century. I photographed all of them, and I still have them in my photo collection. But that was quite an experience to actually be in that environment, surrounded by statues of the great Enlightenment thinkers. And yes, we need more such places. We need them in the United States as well. So I hope you get to create that someday. Now, there's also a response from Christine with regard to Montreal, and she says a lot of the old church buildings were converted to pubs, condos, there's a library, so a lot of secular purposes that these buildings have been put to. And I think that's all great because those buildings, they have remarkable architecture. People did put a lot of time and effort and attention into them because they cared about making those buildings beautiful. So if there's something beautiful that is of this world, yes, let us convert it into a building that serves a useful purpose in this world. And I will also want to bring up something, since we do not shy away from criticism, even criticism that might not always make sense. Wesley Curry II says, "By Darth Kermit, Club of Satan." So I don't think we've ever been associated with Kermit. I want somebody to create an artwork of Darth Kermit, Sith Lord Kermit the Frog, maybe use Dolly 2 or Midjourney or something like that, and we can put it up. I know, Armin, you publish a collection of blasphemous art on the Atheist Republic. Could you include Darth Kermit in there?
Well, our blasphemous art is needs to be sexy, right? So we actually, that's the whole theme of our blasphemous art. We have like Muhammad, Jesus, Hindu gods and goddesses. That's what got me in trouble in India, by the way. Our blasphemous art. That's how I have police filings against me, because we have very beautiful, sexy arts of their gods, and I thought they would. Yeah, and I thought they would be grateful because we improved their gods. So I don't know how we would make Darth Kermit sexy, but we could try. So yeah.
Interesting. Well, I just think the visualization of Kermit the Frog as a Sith Lord is great, and it speaks to the value of tolerating one's critics, because sometimes they will give you something that you could not have come up with on your own. And I think this is how we differ from the authoritarian movements as well. I don't think anybody of, say, the left coast persuasion that Valerie was talking about would be thrilled to have their movement compared to Darth Kermit, or anyone in an Islamic fundamentalist theocracy would be particularly happy to be portrayed that way. Now, Ben, you said you worked in a church turned architecture firm right after college, and that is also another purpose to which those buildings can be put. But more generally, Ben, do you have any questions or comments for the panel?
Yes, I have a few. I might as well just start at the top one. I know we're probably not talking to any actual crusaders today, but what is your message to crusaders that are legitimately just out there trying to save as many souls as possible, even if you might think that they're not really, that where they're thinking that that's the case is not an accurate way to be thinking about their approach to religion or such things?
Oh, I'm actually grateful both to, I think you're talking about like Christians or Muslims who are trying to genuinely care about you and try to serve you. I actually I actually use them quite often as an example of how you could be against someone's belief system or lack thereof, and still be in support of them, because I'm constantly fighting Islam, Christianity, and Hinduism, and I try to convince people that doesn't mean I'm against Muslims, Christians, or Hindus or Jewish people. And this is an example that I use. I tell Muslims, like, can you imagine a Muslim who is fighting atheism, passionately fighting atheism, because they care for atheists and they are trying to save them from hellfire? Like, so our conclusions are different, but the motivation is very genuine love and care. Can you imagine that? And like many Muslims, like, yeah, I can imagine that someone being against atheism because they have love for atheists because they're trying to save them. I'm like great. So you could see how I could be very much anti-Islam, especially because I think Muslims are victims of Islam. It's not, because many religious people have a hard time understanding that being against their religion does not mean I am fighting them personally. So if you could imagine a religious person being against atheism because of their love and care for atheists, then why can't you imagine the other way around, where somebody is against religion because they love and care for everybody in the world, including religious people? Even if you think that we are causing harm by being against religion, can you see that maybe our motivation is not causing harm? And now we have a general understanding. Like, so even if our conclusions are different, and I think you are unintentionally spreading harm, and you think I am unintentionally spreading harm, at least we could unite over the fact that we are both motivated to make this world, and for you this world and the next one, for me just this world, a better place for everybody. And that's a bonding experience that we could have with religious people.
Very interesting. So people of intense persuasions, even diametrically opposed intense persuasions, can bond in that way based on their shared intention, their very earnest intention to help people see the truth as they perceive it. David, please go ahead.
I tend to agree with parts of what you're saying. I think that in reality, sometimes that really does fall apart. I've been part of many of quote unquote interfaith discussions, and there's still a very tribal nature to belief. And that tends to, even with the good intentions of people who want to build bridges, and I always want to build bridges because, I see the humanity of it, of everyone, is that the good intentions don't continue to build that bridge. That there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of interest, a lot of plans get made, maybe a couple of activities happen, and then it sort of just falls apart until it bubbles up again. My personal ideas are that of, in a secular society, people can certainly do as they wish, without, as long as your rights end at where your fist comes to my nose, right? So as long as you're not punching me, you have a right to, if you feel like you want to try to save my soul, or the people who are like me in the sense of being non-believers, go right ahead. I won't try to stop you. Although, my feeling is, my personal belief is that you're probably wasting your time. But and I have plenty of friends who are orthodox in every, Abrahamic faith and non-Abrahamic faith that you can think of, both as colleagues and friends. We get along because we sort of are actually doing the opposite, not trying to convince each other that we're right or wrong, or trying to save a soul, but trying to see a more common humanity. And then I think that goes even a longer way to making things better for all of us. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, David. And yes, I think it's very important to try to find some common ground with people, to see them as more than their belief framework, whatever that might be.
Right.
And that, I think, does create the opportunity then for one's ideas to be heard and for one to perhaps dispel certain stereotypes that prevent constructive collaboration. So this is what I was trying to do when I was a college student. I would write a lot of essays. I would have conversations with people challenging the premise that morality requires religion and pointing out many areas of similarity. There was a situation where a fairly intelligent and thoughtful Christian student, after a long conversation with me, I think he had a kind of relapse into dogmatism, and he said, well, you and I can have nothing in common because you don't follow the same faith that I do. And I asked him, well, do you believe that 1 + 1 would equal 2? And he said, yes. And I said, well, this is something that we have in common. So let's take that foundation, however large it may be, and build off of that and perhaps find some other things that we have in common. And I think that had an impression on him. I think he kind of reconsidered the very aggressively dogmatic stance that he had taken. Now, Valerie, how would you suggest dealing with these kinds of intense religious crusaders?
Well, I think that, again, coming out of evangelical Christianity, and there's some, the street epistemology folks are kind of doing the best they can to figure out how do you create opportunities to challenge or provoke thought in people whose belief system is essentially like a smooth-walled cylinder. But I think that the fact that many of them perceive us as lacking a moral core, and that they have what Lawrence Krauss called a monopoly on morality, creates an opening in that the more somebody stereotypes you in ways that don't fit you, the more you have the chance to mess with their perception of you, right? So I have a brother who's gay, and when he was first coming out, I said, all you have to do to mess with people's stereotypes of gay men is just go out into the world and be yourself, because he didn't fit those stereotypes. And I think the same is true for those of us. If we can be out in a gentle kind of non-confrontational way about the fact that we are various forms of non-believers, and then we continue to manifest the kinds of qualities that they've been told or taught don't exist in non-believers, that messes with their categories.
Yes, indeed, because it defies their stereotypes of what non-believers are like. And I definitely have tried to do that myself. So there are some caricatured portrayals of atheists that, of course, don't correspond to reality at all. And when I was at Hillsdale College, I presented myself in a similar way to how I present myself now. And I dress fairly conservatively, even for that kind of environment. I always speak quite politely to people. I listen to what they have to say, even if I disagree with it. And I think a lot of the students there thought, well, atheists are just these very strident, quasi-Satanistic types of people because they haven't actually encountered an atheist in the real world before. It's just they were susceptible to the propaganda they were taught as children, and their autonomous portions of their lives had just begun, essentially, when they came to the college campus. So hopefully I was able to give them at least a more nuanced perspective. Richard Russell has an interesting idea of inviting Jehovah's Witness and Mormon missionaries to one's house at the same time and letting them debate one another. I think that would be quite amusing. And my historical approach to such missionaries whenever they approach me would be just to say, well, I'm an atheist. I'm a strong atheist. I've thought this through. You will never persuade me. But perhaps I could pursue a different approach and say, well, yes, I will agree to speak with you, but we have to have some missionaries of another faith there at the same time, and you have to speak to them as well. And I will watch you discuss religion with one another. But that's an interesting suggestion. Now I want to go to Art Ramon and see if he has any questions.
Not so much questions, more comment. Yeah, I see this big fight coming between secularism and religion, and it kind of has to deal with technological singularity. So it's like both groups are going to try to define that narrative. What is technological singularity? The secularists are going to want it to be more of a human-based transfiguration where people are sort of exalted by enhancement. And the religious are going to try to bring about this sort of end times prophecy type narrative where it's going to be some sort of God that comes down from the heavens and uplifts humans into some sort of angelic state. So do you see anything like this? I mean, I see it, but what do other people think? Do you see this battle coming between secularism and religion?
Let's see.
I am constantly seeing this in Muslim spaces as a fear tactic. There are many tools that Muslim content creators, the conservative ones, use as a way to scare people from the world liberal order taking over everything and destroying everyone's lives, destroying family values, destroying everything that is wholesome about society. And sex positivity is one of them. Gender, transgender issues is another one, as a way for them to scare everybody. Low birth rates, higher divorce rates. These are the scary things. But one of the ones that is their favorite is transhumanism and the technology. Basically taking over our lives away from what's natural and what God intended towards this satanic plan, which is transhumanism, right? And they are seeing that as quite in line with liberalism. So they see liberalism and science and transhumanism and Satanism quite as sometimes the same thing, with the same goal of moving away from what God intended. And they see the technological progress as a weapon of Satan to take us towards this direction. They constantly look for signs within transhumanist societies or movements over the Apple sign or anything that is they could associate with something satanic. And they have so many conspiracies. They are looking for the sign of the beast and many other signs. I don't know why they look for that. That's a Christian symbol, but Muslims are now obsessed with that, many of them. But it's quite a a focus on many of these content creators to transhumanism and the fear of what that, and they have this idea of like humans will have nothing to live for. We will all be machines serving, the powers that be, whether it's Illuminati or Satanists. So yeah, I constantly see that as a fear tactic among Muslim YouTube content creators.
Yes. Well, thank you for sharing that, Armin. It's amusing to me how these critics, and there are Christian religious fundamentalist critics as well who engage in this kind of rhetoric, they seem to lump everything they dislike into this one giant amorphous threat. Like you said, with the Apple symbol, somehow equating that to transhumanism and lumping that in with the atheist community or the breakdown of family values.
Yeah, it's because it's all part of how you construct your worldview. I've been very religious before, and it has to do with part, how do you, rationalize, your illogic, basically. And then therefore it becomes, if something happens you don't know, oh, well, then it's a demon, and you can always find a way to rationalize it. And and somehow, fit it into, and that's probably why they're looking so hard, because they're trying to figure out a way to fit it into their worldview, because it ain't fitting real good. If it was fitting easy, they wouldn't be thinking about it.
Yes, it definitely does not fit well. And I'm wondering, though, if technological progress could be used to bring some religious people along to more humanistic positions and more science-based positions, just because they can see the beneficial power of science and technology. David, did you want to comment on this?
You're muted.
There's a few things, and I always take the anthropological perspective when someone says it's too much technology. Well, you have to ask, well, where do you want to go back to? Do you want to go back to the Iron Age? Is that your comfort level? Do you want to go back to the Stone Age, the Bronze Age? I mean, at what point do I mean, it's okay to have these questions and these ethical concerns about how it is that humans manage and manipulate their technology. We've been dealing with that since humans have been humans. But the question is, we are growing our knowledge base because of the tools of science. So it's when the question is asked, is this a war? Well, and who's going to win? Well, I think the secularists have already won. If you must know, because unless you're an extreme religious dogmatist, like, let's say, certain religious Jews in Brooklyn, or the Amish, or, that's your frame of reference, 16th century Europe or whatever, you're not going to adopt the technology. But the rest of us, the 8 billion of us, 7 billion of us, are going to keep going on. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't worry about it and what it means in terms of how it is we define our humanity. But it does mean that, the cat is already out of the bag. And we should see this as not all technology, including transhumanism, as an extension of our human existence and not an evil part of our existence. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. And I often say that many people, the majority of people perhaps, are implicit transhumanists without even necessarily being aware of the term, because of how they use technology to transform what they're capable of in their lives. And there was an artwork about transhumanism that Armin just showed, but I want to.
It's a safe for work version. So if you want to share it, it's completely safe for work.
It's completely safe for work.
Yes. So because a lot of Muslims fear transhumanism, our blasphemous art project, we made this art. So by the way, if you guys want to see our art, it's at blasphemousart.com. So because they constantly see this transhumanism in line with Satanism and the apple symbol, we made an Islamically themed art with a Muslim woman with the hijab, reaching out and accepting and giving in to the progress of technology and accepting the apple from Satan. And you can see her hand is turning robotic as a symbol of transhumanism.
Yes, very interesting adaptation of the Islamic fundamentalist critique of transhumanism into this artwork. Yes, I quite like it. It's interesting too. You see the shards of stained glass around the woman, kind of this almost holographic stained glass. It's as if it's taking part in the transformation of the hand into a robotic hand.
And also the apple for us symbolizes knowledge, because it was the fruit of knowledge in the Garden of Eve, and it's quite amazing that the religious people see that as a sin, accepting knowledge. So we actually kind of twist that around in our art and see that as something positive, like you're accepting knowledge from the devil. If the devil is sort of devil is supposed to symbolize giving knowledge to mankind, then we, technology is also symbolizes knowledge, so we kind of celebrate that in our art.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
There's technology right in the art. I mean, you couldn't have made that picture like 20 years ago. That CGI is cool, man. That's cool stuff.
Yes, indeed. David, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to mention there was this cartoon some years ago where they had these what essentially are cavemen sitting around, and they're two old guys, and they're like, oh, look at these young kids with their Arshulian tools. Don't they know us Olawan tools were much better? And
yes.
For those of you who understand early tool industries of Pleistocene living, some people might fear the control of fire was too much technology. I don't know.
Yes, indeed. And I think to some extent that is perhaps just a function of status quo bias, what people are familiar with, what they have experienced, especially early on in their lives, tends to be a kind of anchor point for them. And they have a difficult time unless they make an active mental effort to accept something that departs from that or tries to improve upon it. Now, we also have an interesting remark by Alan Crowley, who writes, I get a kick out of how powerful our tiny group of transhumanists are and control everything on the planet, and how that's portrayed on YouTube. And he's hanging out on Sunday afternoon with real folks who control the world. Well, we like to stay humble, Alan. But Valerie, what are your thoughts on perhaps the future dynamics in regard to how religions respond to technological advancement? Do you think it's more likely that there will be a religious fundamentalist backlash, or that the majority of religious people will essentially get taken along by the technology into a better world, a world where they come to see the benefits of science and perhaps the benefits of a more humanistic approach as well?
Well, I've heard it said that at least in Christianity, what we're looking at is the death rattle of perhaps the Abrahamic religions, that they are increasing. If you look at what happens with cults and religions, is that the more beleaguered they feel, the more countercultural they are, the more rigid and dogmatic and aggressive they tend to become. And so what you see in fundamentalist Christianity, at least, is this, it's all reactive to the culture around us, right? And the fact that the mainline denominations of Christianity largely adapted to the kind of, the Industrial Revolution, the scientific method, the information age, and that you've got these holdouts. And so what I might expect is that there will be pockets of holdouts around the world in the various axial age religions, people who retreat, if not into, like the Amish have, into kind of, 500 years ago in Europe or whatever it was, but the kind of present day in the United States, or the present day in Iran, or the present day in India, and carve out insular communities of thought and perhaps mutual support for themselves. Of course, the technologies make us all much more vulnerable. And so we look at something like ISIS and how much destruction they were able to inflict on people around them who didn't share those regressive beliefs. And I think that's kind of the biggest question I have is, I think I kind of agree with David that in some ways we've come up with something so much better. The scientific method is what we know about how not to fool ourselves, right? And it's just become, we ask the questions that can prove us wrong rather than asking the questions that keep showing us right. And I think that, to that degree, religious dogmas are in fact outcompeted. It's just a question of what they're going to do to human well-being or even human survival in the interim, as we struggle to adapt to some major planetary challenges that where they're being explicitly obstructionist about that adaptive process.
Yes, yes, indeed. And I tend to share the view that really forceful fundamentalist interpretations of religion are on the way out, just because there are much better sources of meaning available for people, but there is that concern about what damage they might inflict in the meantime. And I think we may be seeing that play out in Iran before we see it playing out in the West. If the backlash against authoritarian religion is as strong as Armin describes, then I don't see how the theocracy can last for another 5 years. And we will see more popular uprisings and, unfortunately, a crackdown or an attempted crackdown by the theocracy, which hopefully will not succeed. Now, we have some interesting observations. Richard Russell provides a quotation: anything that is in the world when you're born is normal and ordinary and is just part of the way the world works. Anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a career in it. And then anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things. And that is a quotation from Douglas Adams. Well, I hope I don't get permanently stuck in the year 2023 in terms of my attitudes, because I'm right at that boundary line right now. I think we definitely need to get to a much better and more advanced world than the world of 2023. And hopefully further technological advances will play an important role in this. Now, also, it was noted that some of the anti-transhumanist YouTube videos are hilarious. Mike Lazine points out that there are videos dealing with Sophia the robot being 666 and so on. And actually, I met Sophia the robot in person in 2018 at the RADFest conference. RADFest stands for Revolution Against Aging and Death. And I got to see a musical performance by Sophia. But interestingly enough, the government of Saudi Arabia granted Sophia the robot citizenship. So even a very hardline Muslim government has become a bit more open, a bit more enlightened in its attitudes toward technology. Now, Jason mentioned in our internal chat that his problem with indoctrinating children with religion is centered around the fear that is involved. So, Jason, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Little bit of history. My mom, I guess, I don't know what you call it, atheist, but she allowed me to travel my own path and learn things my own way. And I ended up kind of getting all religious anyway for a while. I was Pentecostal. One of my best friends was, had a whole Pentecostal family. And so I kind of lived at their house. And, anyway, the problem with the fear, when it's used in their indoctrination, is because if it follows the same path and the same playbook as brainwashing, well, then that's not cool. We could probably all agree that brainwashing is probably not cool, right? That's, maybe that's just me, but anyway, and I'm really glad that he mentioned earlier about the window thing, because I remember, and I had kind of a criminal record, even though I was super religious. Funny how that happens, right? It can make you as a kid sort of like the Joker mentality. It's like, well, I'm gonna burn anyway. There's nothing I can do about it. So, it puts you on death ground, as Sun Tzu would say. you're gonna die and burn anyway, so why not go crazy, basically. And that's not cool, especially for kids that can't handle it that good, and that is what is basically the main thing that got me to realize that there is a big problem here. When I had my son and looking at him, and here I'm looking back and I'm realizing that I've lived just in a state of utter terror 24/7, for the last years. And would I want that for him? Would I want my kid to be just in a complete utter state of terror over me punishing him for something? No, because I love him. That's not how it works. So that's that's how I came to that realization. But I'll pass it back. That's good enough for now.
And definitely the element of fear that is often used as part of religious indoctrination is quite traumatic to children, and it leads them into a fear-based worldview as opposed to a reason-based worldview. So they may choose to do something or not do something because they're afraid of what will be done to them, rather than appraising the objective benefits and risks of that activity, and trying perhaps to have more positive motivations. So
it's just not sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's what I like about humanism. Not that it needs to replace a religion or anything, but it's sustainable. You're not doing it because, you're afraid of burning in hell, or because, they say it's the rules are the right way to do. It's because you believe that it's the right thing to do. It's like a religious person that has grown up. They're still religious. They still believe in right and wrong. They just do it for different reasons, is all. That's it.
Well, I think it is very important to connect morality to this world. And a comment from one of our viewers, Charles Zorn, will, I think, be helpful here. He writes, the claims of saving souls promise protracted supernaturality. Saving human lives preserves natural humanity, improves tangible human conditions and civility. So a focus on this world as essentially the beneficiary of our moral actions, and other human beings as beneficiaries of our moral actions as well. Now we have about 7 minutes left in our salon, so I would invite each of our guests to provide closing remarks. Anything else that you would like to say, any ways in which you would like to sum up this conversation, please feel free to state them here. Who would like to begin? Let's see, David.
First, I've learned to take myself off of mute. That's one of the teachable moments for me. First I want to, of course, thank everybody for attending and for the invitation to be with such a great group of people. It's nice to meet everybody, and I hope that this is the start of a longer conversation. And now you have me as a gum on the bottom of your shoe. So if you ever need to reach out or want to talk, I'd love to continue the conversation. But I think for me, the lessons are that, as there are at last count, right? 1.8 billion people on the planet, but of that, about 1.2 billion people are people without any religion, or who might be spiritual but not religious. And that we can't forget that there's an awful lot of us, and we're not going anywhere. And that our movement is growing, whether we call it transhumanism or modern atheism or humanism, whatever we want to call it. And that we exist in every walk of life, on every continent, and in every community. And I think the most important thing is for us to remember is that when we talk about these issues of technology or human rights or any of those things, that we are connected to something much bigger than even ourselves, because if if longevity means anything, it means that not only do we live on, and this is the anthropologist in me talking, not only do we live on in the genes of other people quietly, but we live on in their voices when they remember us. So the question I think we have to ask is, how is it that we, as links in the chain, evolutionarily, biologically, culturally, plan to move the stone up the hill a little bit more? And there's a million ways to do that, right? Through advocacy, through financing, through public speaking, through whatever those methods are. And so I would feel very strongly that we continue to question, to continue to use our curiosity, and to continue to build on all the positives that have come out of this program and what we do just in general. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, David, for those comments. And indeed, let us keep building upon the great progress that we've made here. I would be happy to have each one of you as guests individually for future virtual enlightenment salons, where we can delve into these ideas and related ideas in greater depth. Now, Valerie, what are some closing comments that you would offer?
I actually just want to use this opportunity to underscore what Armin said earlier about finding ways to call attention to and support the transition in Iran and in other places in the Middle East. The religious right in this country is not going to be supportive of that. Is not going to, because even though they are often very critical of Islam and Islamophobic, that they also kind of dehumanize people who are different in a way that means that they're not going to be supportive. So it falls to us who are kind of in the center and on the left to provide that support. And as conflicted as it is with the anxieties about Islamophobia, we need to find ways to call that out and to elevate what's happening.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And Armin, please go ahead.
I just want to ask again everybody to try to have a global perspective over this whole secular, atheist, humanist, whatever you want to call it, movement. We're all in, I know it's cliche to say, but we're all in this together, and we are affecting each other globally more than ever before. And there are not that many things that is standing in the way of progress, more than religion. Like and I'm not exaggerating because I'm an atheist activist. I'm trying to be as objective as I can. But if you look at the world superpower, which is the United States, the party that is right now standing in the way of human rights, women's rights, gay rights, trans rights, fighting global warming, scientific progress, and everything. It's a party that is voted in a lot by religious beliefs. Like people who have religious beliefs have made this party, the Republican Party, relevant. And United States is a country where its politics affects every other country in the world. So religion in the United States is affecting everyone, all of us on the planet. And we have one of the most populated countries in the world, which is India, its politics is being plagued by far-right religious extremism. And basically the world's biggest democracy is now the world's biggest secular country, which is India. Its secularism is now very much being threatened by Hindutva nationalists. And a lot of people don't understand that the greatest rise of far-right extremism, religious far-right extremism, is now happening in India. And when I talk about far-right extremism, people usually think white nationalism, and that is important. I don't want to take away from how important it is, but the greatest rise of far-right extremism is happening right now in India, and it's happening because of religion, because of Hindu extremism, and not that many people even know about that. And population-wise, India is a place where everybody needs to be concerned about. And I don't know, if you look at Europe, many far-right extremism is growing in Europe. If you look at Israel is a smaller country with a much smaller population, but for some reason Israel's politics influences the entirety of the Middle East and United States. So Israel is a place that we need to be concerned about. So I just invite people not to just look at Europe or United States. I just want people to understand that whatever is happening in other countries is going to affect us all. And I want us to figure out ways to make this community of atheists more interconnected globally, especially as AI becomes better at translation, and language barriers are going to become less of an issue. So we need to take full advantage of that as much as we can. And if I may, I want to plug Atheist Republic for having this global perspective. I'm the founder of Atheist Republic, for people who don't know. And I invite you to check our YouTube channel, Atheist Republic. When we cover religion and atheism and secular related content, we cover the news. We have a news show every week that we cover 10 items, and we do have a very global perspective. So if you wanna have a global perspective, our channel is a great resource.
Yes, thank you very much, Armin. And unfortunately, our time has come to an end today, but it was an amazing discussion, and I appreciate everyone's contributions. I echo Dowd Sheikh's words that we would hope to see a transhumanist or technological movement that rivals the theological movements of today. And Daniel Tweed says the long arc of history is bending toward greater reason and tolerance. I hope we can help contribute to that. And until next time, everyone, live long and prosper.